So we're back with a Karen Read update. As of this filming, we're filming the week of August 5th. Last week, the prosecutors in the Karen Read case submitted a memorandum, I think, to the judge explaining that they had been contacted directly through the phone at their office by a few jurors. I think it was three. One or two didn't want to be identified specifically. All these jurors are terrified for their own safety, and they probably should be. And one who did identify themselves, I believe, but that's actually not the most important part about this information. Those jurors purportedly told the prosecutor in the case that the jury had come to a unanimous decision that Karen Read was in fact not guilty on the charge of second-degree murder and leaving the scene of a deadly crash. Now, this information goes in direct opposition to what the prosecutors had said prior, right? So we heard right after the mistrial was called, the defense attorney coming back to the court and saying that these two charges should be dismissed and that they had information that they had information from certain jurors that there had been a unanimous not guilty on those two charges and that they didn't know that they could come to a partial verdict. And now we see prosecutors coming forward with this information. And so I think what's really important before people jump to conclusions is to understand that prosecutors probably did nothing wrong, right? Their initial response to the defense motion was by the book, that they hadn't received any information to share with the court that would have given them reason to believe that there had been not guilty findings on certain charges. But what I think a lot of people in the public don't know about prosecutors is that when there is information relative to a defense, when information comes into their purview, they have an obligation to share it. So it's not as though they were hiding this information and now they're sharing it. It's, oh, they received these calls and now they are sharing it. They did not have this information the last time they were in court. So what I kind of like, when I read the tea leaves here, it's that there was a mistrial. The defense attorneys somehow, through whatever channels, whether they are nefarious or not, found out that there was a unanimous not guilty on a few of the charges. The defense counsel shared that with the court. This was the first time the prosecutors had ever heard of that. They disputed that. Karen Read was recharged. A trial date was set. They still had no information. And then subsequent to that, as this hearing date for the motion to dismiss, which the defense had submitted to dismiss those two charges, was coming closer, the prosecutors received this call or these calls. And now they're sharing that with the court. So what now? Like, what's going to happen? So there's a hearing on August 9th. The defense, we know what the defense is going to do. The defense is going to argue to dismiss those two charges or more, perhaps, but that arguing that the prosecutors do not have probable cause to charge or to recharge. And it's not only that they have this information about the jurors, right? We all saw how weak the case was and how many holes were in the case. So with this added information, the defense attorneys are going to say that the prosecutors have no way of proving their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So I've read different things. I have read that the juries certainly could have asked Judge Cannoni, can we come to a partial verdict? And then I've read disparate things about whether Judge Cannoni could say to the jury, if you don't come to a unanimous guilty verdict on all charges, but you do on some, that's called a partial verdict, and that's acceptable. Now, I read some pieces that said that could be interpreted as leading or persuasive. I don't think I agree with that. I think that for people who are not well versed in trial advocacy and have never been a juror before, which I'm sure is every single person on that jury, they may not have known just earnestly that they could come to a partial verdict. And it doesn't seem as though Judge Cannoni made that clear. So what happens then? Like, then is that a real issue? The other thing that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me now, I have not reviewed all the transcripts, but I think it would have come out if this had happened, is that Judge Cannoni and the jury communicated multiple times after both sides closed, right? Because they kept coming back saying we can't come to a unanimous decision, like we're totally deadlocked. And she kept sending them out, like, give it more time, take a break, have lunch, you know. So you would think that during those interactions, she could say, well, if you can come to a unanimous decision on some of the counts. So I think there's a lot of questions. I imagine that something is going to happen on Friday. I think the question, if they do dismiss these two charges, what precedent does it set for making decisions after the fact, which is a real concern. I also think there's this valid concern that how do all of these people have information that the lawyers and the law enforcement officers on the case don't have? What is going on? If I were to guess what is going to happen on the 9th, which is the end of this week on Friday, my guess is that those charges will be dismissed. And what I don't know is whether the prosecutors will charge Miss Read with other offenses, right? So she was charged with second-degree murder initially. A lot of people thought that was overcharging. Could she be charged with something less, like lesser and included, like involuntary manslaughter or leaving the scene of a crime, not a deadly crash, right? There's so many other charges. So I don't know what the prosecutors will do with that. I don't know if they're just going to say, like, this isn't worth it. This isn't worth the public's money or the attention that this case has gotten. But there are a lot of people who want justice for John O'Keefe, and what does that mean to them? Like, the ones that have spoken out have said that they want to see Karen Read charged again. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but this added information is new. I think prosecutors were not hiding it. They absolutely did the right thing in sharing this information now. And I mean, my guess is that those charges will be dismissed. I will be surprised if they're not. If they're not dismissed, what's going to happen? And that's kind of a question, because this case has been so unorthodox in all these different ways. But also, we really need to pay attention, because I think this is how some high-profile cases are going to go from now on, that garner a lot of national and international attention, that people are doing their own investigation, for good or bad. And with added information comes added oversight in some ways of the people involved in the case. And how does that impact charging decisions? So you heard it here first. That's my guess as to what's going to happen. We'll see August 9th. Okay, that's Friday. So we'll be back talking about it, but very interesting, not surprising. And I have a lot of compassion for the jurors. Like, what does a juror do in this situation if they have information that they don't believe people are aware of that does impact the outcome of a case? And also, it's such a high-profile case. There's so many strong emotions, and their safety and the safety of their family is potentially threatened. I mean, jurors are just random people in the community. They didn't ask for this. And so I imagine they don't want to be redrawn into. Now, I guess I don't know. I've said this before. I'm not a jury expert, but I guess there is a version. I don't know if this would ever happen where Judge Canoni talks to each juror. But I don't think that could happen because of undue influence, right? Like it's really the jury and the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorneys are all supposed to be very separate. And so I don't know. But that's where we are. I imagine both sides are busy preparing for Friday. I also imagine that this is not the information that the prosecutors wanted to receive. It definitely weakens their case, without a doubt. So thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but more on this and other high-profile cases at a different time. I'm Margo Lindauer, and that's the law.